Deep beneath the sands of Saqqara, inside the Serapeum, an underground passage carved directly into solid bedrock is lined with 24 enormous stone boxes. Each of these boxes weighs as much as 100 tons, and every one of them was carved from a single piece of stone. Not just any stone either, these massive containers were made from granite. Granite ranks 8 out of 10 on the hardness scale. It's tougher than steel, harder than most modern cutting tools, and even today it remains one of the most difficult materials on Earth to shape and work with. Modern engineers rely on diamond-tipped equipment to cut granite. Yet the conventional explanation says these ancient builders used nothing more than copper chisels, stone hammers, and abrasive sand. Mainstream Egyptology has maintained this view for more than a century. But the marks left behind on the granite don't resemble the work of copper tools. Instead, they appear to match the effects of a machine that no ancient civilization should have possessed. This isn't a matter of having a slightly better tool, it suggests an entirely different form of energy. That energy source has never been clearly identified in any ancient artifact, any surviving text, or any archaeological site anywhere on Earth. There is only one exception, a single inscription examined by Egyptologist Salim Hassan in 1938. The inscription was catalogued without any real commentary and stored away in a restricted section of the Cairo Museum archives. Written in straightforward administrative hieroglyphics, it describes a power source that has no known name in any language we fully understand. Over the next few minutes, you'll see what the stone itself reveals about the technology that was used to cut it. You'll also discover why modern physics can identify the machine's output but still cannot explain its input, and why the power source that drove this device remains one of the most unsettling unsolved mysteries in the entire history of human civilization. This is a story that has been overlooked for a very long time. Stay with me until the end, because what comes next may completely reshape the way you think about history. But here's where things become even stranger. The inscription nearly disappeared. In 1938, during his final survey season in the Valley of the Kings, Salim Hassan documented what is known as the KV-17 panel. In his notes, he described it only as tool-related administrative text of uncertain classification. Then he moved on. He never returned to the panel, and in 1961, he passed away. For decades, his notes remained untouched in the Cairo Museum archives. Then, in 2017, an independent researcher gained access to related survey materials and photographed the panel. The image was later shared on a restricted engineering history forum. Within just 72 hours, the discussion thread vanished. The researcher's access to the archives was revoked, but by then the photograph had already been copied and circulated. What it revealed was remarkable. The panel was written in the same administrative script Egyptian scribes commonly used for quarry records and labor accounts. It described a cutting mechanism with clearly defined components, a specific sequence of operation, and a power source identified by a term that appears only once in the entire body of Egyptian administrative texts. One inscription. One unique term. No parallel anywhere else in the ancient world. Hassan's team read this inscription in 1938, but it was never published as a technical document and was never seriously analyzed by anyone trained in physics rather than Egyptology. This isn't speculation. The KV-17 panel exists. The Serapeum boxes exist. The tool marks remain preserved in the stone. And engineers, not historians, have measured the signatures left by those cuts. What follows is based on what the stone itself demonstrates and why that evidence points towards something we still cannot explain. The inscription can be divided into 3 distinct components. It begins by describing the tool itself. The hieroglyphics refer to a rotating cutting instrument. The marker attached to the phrase is the same one used for spinning mechanisms rather than ceremonial objects. The text also specifies that 2 operators were required and includes a scale indicator that rules out any handheld device. Instead, it describes a large rotating tube that was pressed against stone under carefully controlled downward pressure. The second component identifies the abrasive material that was continuously fed into the mechanism. The material is called shafet, a paste prepared directly at the cutting site. Modern studies of ancient drill hole remnants found at Aswan have detected traces of crushed corundum inside those holes. Corundum has a hardness rating of 9 and is the same material used in modern industrial grinding discs. In other words, the ancient Egyptians appear to have mixed a corundum-based paste and fed it into a rotating tube that was cutting into granite. Both the inscription and the quarry evidence support this conclusion together, much like a maintenance record and a parts receipt can confirm exactly how a machine was built. But the third component is where the inscription reaches the limits of our understanding. This final section describes the power source. The text uses the phrase nefer en pet ket up, which translates roughly as, the perfect turning of the heavenly directive. The word nefer means perfect or optimal. The word pet refers to the sky or heaven. The phrase ket up means to operate or control a mechanism. However, the crucial word that appears between them, the term specifying the type of turning involved, exists nowhere else in Egyptian administrative texts, religious writings, or literary records that have ever been catalogued. One word. One inscription. No parallel. The few Egyptologists who have examined it have translated the phrase in different ways. Some have called it divine vibration. Others have rendered it as celestial resonance. One unpublished note from a 1992 survey of the KV-17 archive photographs described it simply as an unknown mechanism type. What matters is that the inscription is clearly referring to a power source. It uses the most precise administrative language available, yet that same language leads to a term that nobody can confidently identify. The power source has no known name in any record we are able to fully understand. And this brings us to the part that the stone itself can prove. Whatever this mysterious power source was, it left a physical signature in the granite that modern physics can read with remarkable precision. And the message it gives is simple. The cutting process produced absolutely no subsurface fracturing. None. That single fact changes everything. Whenever mechanical force is applied to granite, whether with copper, iron, diamond tools, or modern drilling equipment, the crystal structure beneath the cut develops fractures. Tiny cracks spread downward from the cutting surface into the solid material below. This effect is unavoidable. It is simply the physical consequence of force interacting with crystalline stone. Think of snapping a piece of wood. The fibers don't break only at the surface, they tear and separate below the point of impact as well. The hidden damage beneath the break is always there. Granite behaves in exactly the same way. Any cut made into it should leave fractures extending beneath the surface. But these cuts don't. The stone beneath each cut remains completely pristine, almost as if the granite was never broken in the first place. Every known cutting tool leaves subsurface damage. Every single one. Except for one category of process. When a cutting surface vibrates at an ultrasonic frequency, anything above 20,000 cycles per second, the vibration disrupts the crystalline bonds at the point of contact so rapidly that the stone separates cleanly at the boundary. Instead of cracks spreading into the material below, the crystal structure remains intact. The subsurface stays undamaged. The cut boundary remains perfectly clean. And the signature left behind is unmistakable. The interiors of the Serapeum boxes and the drill cores from Aswan display precisely these characteristics. There is no subsurface fracturing. The boundaries are clean. The crystal structure below the cuts remains untouched. The stone was not broken apart in the conventional sense. It was separated by a process operating at frequencies beyond the range of human hearing. And this happened around 4,000 years ago. What follows from that conclusion is where the real problem begins. Ultrasonic cutting requires a power source capable of sustaining vibrations of at least 20,000 cycles per second. In modern engineering, this is accomplished through a piezoelectric transducer, a device that converts electrical energy into mechanical vibrations at a controlled frequency. Such a system requires electricity. It requires a frequency generator. And it demands a stable, sustained, high-frequency source of energy. Yet no ancient civilization has ever produced an artifact, mechanism, residue, or written description of anything remotely comparable. Not in Egypt. Not in Mesopotamia. Not in China. Not anywhere on Earth. The results of the process are preserved in the stone itself. But the energy source that could have powered it has no known ancient equivalent anywhere on the planet. We can describe, with remarkable precision, the physical process that produced these cuts. What we cannot explain is what powered that process. The inscription gives this power source a name. But the name means nothing we recognize. And the gap between a clearly demonstrated output and an unidentifiable input is far more than a historical curiosity. It represents a fundamental challenge to nearly every assumption we hold about the technological limits of ancient civilizations. The mystery becomes even deeper when we consider its geographical distribution. The same four signatures, zero subsurface fracturing, a 1 mm advance rate, corundum present at the shear interface, and point source thermal alteration, appear not only at the Serapeum and Aswan, but also at the Valley Temple of Khafre in Giza, the Abu Rawash quarry in the north, and the column bases of Karnak's inner sanctuary in the south. These sites are separated by hundreds of kilometers. They belong to different dynasties. They span different centuries. Yet they all display evidence of the same cutting process and the same mysterious power source. Whatever this technology was, it appears to have operated consistently across an entire civilization for an unknown length of time. Then, suddenly, it disappeared. Not gradually. Not region by region. Gone everywhere at once. Every site seems to have lost it simultaneously. The power source did not vanish in one location while surviving in another. It ended everywhere. That is not the pattern of a technology being replaced by something better. It is the pattern of a power source being cut off. There is another detail that standard interpretations rarely mention. In 1983, engineer Christopher Dunn measured the groove advance rate in the Aswan drill cores and found it to be approximately 1 mm per rotation through solid granite. That figure demands a very specific combination of rotational speed and downward force. When engineers calculate the amount of energy required to sustain that rate of progress through granite using a corundum abrasive slurry, the resulting power requirements exceed the capabilities of any human-powered mechanism by an entire order of magnitude. A bow drill cannot achieve it. A lever system cannot achieve it. A counterweight system cannot achieve it. None of them can generate the sustained power necessary for such performance. The grooves preserved in the stone imply an energy input that has no known equivalent among ancient human-powered technologies. The inscription refers to this source as the perfect turning of the heavenly directive. The stone, meanwhile, points toward a process that does not fit within any known inventory of ancient energy technologies. Both lines of evidence are directing our attention toward the same unanswered gap. And that gap has never been filled. The single term found in the KV-17 inscription, the word that appears nowhere else in 4,000 years of Egyptian writing, has been examined by only 3 scholars who gained access to the archive photograph. The first, writing in a 1992 survey note, labeled it an unknown mechanism type and pursued the matter no further. The second identified it as a hapax, a word that appears only once in all known literature and therefore cannot be meaningfully cross-referenced. The third, an Egyptologist from the Oriental Institute in Chicago, described it during a 2019 conference presentation as a term from a vocabulary we do not have. Not a vocabulary that is only partially recovered. A vocabulary we do not possess at all. In other words, the inscription appears to be using a technical term from a specialized register of Egyptian that has left no other surviving trace. One word. The name of a power source. A term preserved within a language system we can no longer access. And whatever this power source was, it accomplished several extraordinary things. It cut through granite without creating fractures beneath the surface. It advanced through stone at a rate that exceeds the capabilities of human-powered mechanisms. It left concentrated thermal signatures at its points of contact. And then it disappeared completely and permanently across an entire civilization at some unknown point in predynastic history. The thermal evidence brings the argument to its conclusion. Under high magnification, the cut surfaces of the Serapeum boxes display signs of point source thermal alteration precisely at the cutting boundaries. This is not heat distributed through ordinary friction. It is concentrated heat located exactly at the point of contact. The affected area is extremely small, and the thermal change does not spread into the surrounding material. Normally, when two surfaces rub together, heat disperses throughout the entire friction zone. But when ultrasonic vibration produces microscopic impacts at a cutting interface, the heat remains concentrated at the contact point and dissipates before it can spread. It is pinpoint heat rather than widespread heat. And the surfaces of the Serapeum boxes exhibit pinpoint heat. At this stage, 4 separate physical signatures align perfectly. There is zero subsurface fracturing. There is a 1 mm advance rate per rotation. There is corundum abrasive present at the clean shear interface. And there is point source thermal alteration. All 4 observations are consistent with ultrasonic machining. At the same time, all 4 observations are inconsistent with any power source that has ever been identified in the ancient world. The machine is demonstrated by the evidence it left behind. The power source is defined by its complete absence from everything we currently know. Then there is the Diary of Mirror, the oldest papyrus ever discovered in Egypt. Unearthed at Wadi El Jarf in 2013 by archaeologist Pierre Taulet and dated to the reign of Khufu, the document records the transportation of limestone blocks to Giza using straightforward administrative language. The document is essentially a shipping log. It records quantities, transport routes, and time frames much like a modern logistics report would. The movement of limestone is carefully documented. The granite work is not. For a civilization that meticulously recorded nearly everything, labor assignments, food rations, delivery schedules, and administrative details, the complete absence of records concerning granite cutting becomes a finding in itself. The most precisely worked stone in the ancient world left behind no paper trail, no quarry records, no inventory of tools, and no labor reports. There is only one inscription. One tomb. And one term that no one has been able to translate. It is almost as though the cutting operations took place outside the normal administrative system, beyond the workforce that filed reports and outside the chain of command responsible for keeping records. It's as if the people operating the machine were not fully part of the civilization that existed around it. What museums rarely mention is something even stranger: the timeline appears to be reversed. The oldest granite cuts in Egypt are also the most precise. Not the newest. The oldest. The later dynasties, the periods whose records we can read with much greater confidence, display progressively rougher granite work. Their stonework shows more fracturing, more irregularities, and more evidence of conventional mechanical tools. That is the opposite of what we would normally expect. Technology usually improves over time. Civilizations generally begin with crude methods and gradually develop greater precision and sophistication. But Egypt appears to run in reverse. Its finest stonework predates the periods that are best documented. If that observation is correct, it would suggest that the technology did not originate and gradually develop within Egypt itself. It did not evolve step by step from simpler techniques. Instead, it seems to have appeared already functioning at a level that later generations could neither reproduce nor maintain. Eventually, it was lost altogether. The KV-17 inscription does not read like the description of a new invention. Rather, it sounds like the account of something inherited, something received from an earlier source. The inscription names that source, but we cannot identify it. And when it disappeared, all that remained were the stones it had cut. 4,000 years of granite. One inscription. One mysterious term that nobody can translate. The unfinished obelisk at Aswan makes the puzzle even more difficult to ignore. This enormous monument, the largest obelisk ever attempted, still lies attached to the bedrock where work was abandoned. Across its entire length, it displays the same clean shear cuts and the same absence of subsurface fractures. Even the areas near the crack, which mainstream archaeology considers the reason the project was abandoned, show these characteristics. More importantly, the cuts continue beyond the crack. They maintain the same precision, the same clean boundaries, and the same undamaged stone beneath the surface. That suggests that the crack itself did not stop the work. Whatever machine was being used continued cutting after the crack appeared. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Not gradually. Instantly. The cuts at the point where work ended are just as precise as the cuts made at the beginning. There is no evidence of declining performance. There are no signs that a tool wore down. There is no indication that the operators became weaker or less skilled. The machine appears to have been functioning at full precision, and then it simply ceased operating. 1,000 tons of granite remained in the middle of the process. Then there was silence. No record explains why the work ended. No later attempt was made to continue it. The power source did not slowly disappear. It stopped. And whatever it was, it never returned to the obelisk, the Serapeum, or anywhere else preserved in the Egyptian record. The technology responsible for some of the finest granite work in human history simply vanished and left behind only the stone itself. The evidence surrounding this mystery appears to have been obscured in 4 different ways. The first occurred around 1336 BCE, following the death of Akhenaten. The priests of Ammonia systematically chiseled his oval name rings from monuments throughout Egypt. According to this interpretation, Akhenaten had attributed the cutting technology to the pre-dynastic builders known as the Shemsuhor. In his own inscriptions, he reportedly described the power source using language that resembled the terminology found in the KV-17 inscription. After his death, references to pre-dynastic construction technology were removed. From this perspective, the priests were not simply protecting religious doctrine. They were preserving a historical timeline that could not accommodate what the pre-dynastic builders might have known. The second event took place in 391 CE, when a Christian mob destroyed the Serapeum at Alexandria. The library there reportedly contained technical manuscripts categorized under the heading, Methods of the First Stonecutters. Those texts were lost in the fire. The catalog entry survived. The contents did not. The third instance involves Napoleon's expedition to Egypt in 1798. The resulting publication, Description de l'Égypte, included observations made by French engineers. Volume 12 of the first edition, printed in 1813, reportedly contained descriptions of the interior surfaces of the Serapeum boxes. Those engineers allegedly characterized the surfaces as exceeding their ability to explain using the instruments available to them. However, that section was removed from the second edition published in 1817. The page numbers still appear in the index. The actual content is missing. The fourth instance centers on Zahi Hawass, who oversaw Egyptian excavation permits between 2002 and 2011. In 2005, engineer Christopher Dunn applied for permission to conduct precision measurements of the Serapeum interiors using calibrated industrial gauges. The request was denied within 6 weeks. The stated reason was the risk of damaging the surfaces. Yet a gauge gently placed against stone does not damage stone. According to this interpretation, the real concern was the measurement itself, the possibility that it would reveal a degree of flatness that no known ancient tool should have been capable of producing. Such a result, if confirmed according to modern standards, would become part of the public record. To this day, no official measurement of that kind has been recorded. And this is where the story becomes active. In 2021, a research team from the École Normale Supérieure de Lyon submitted an application to perform non-contact laser scanning on a single unoccupied Serapeum box. No excavation was proposed. No physical contact was required. Only a laser scan. The request was routed through the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities. As of 2024, its status remains listed as under review. The boxes are still there in the underground tunnel. The surfaces remain unmeasured. The thermal and crystalline signatures that could potentially confirm the ultrasonic process beyond any remaining uncertainty are effectively waiting inside a government permit application in Cairo. And the question that such scanning might address, what powered the machine that cut these boxes, officially remains unasked. To be clear, this argument is not claiming that the ancient Egyptians possessed electrical generators or frequency synthesizers. The KV-17 inscription does not describe anything we can fully decode. The term used to name the power source appears only once in 4,000 years of Egyptian writing. It does not translate into anything found in our vocabulary. What the stone reveals is the output. It preserves 4 specific physical signatures that modern physics recognizes as being consistent with ultrasonic cutting. What the stone cannot reveal is the input. And that is the central problem. We can identify the process that cut the stone. What we cannot identify is the source of power that made that process possible. We have the end result. What we don't have is an explanation for what produced it. In 4,000 years of archaeology, across every ancient site and on every continent, no equivalent power source has ever been discovered. The machine's signature is preserved in the stone. The power source survives only as a single, untranslatable term. And the enormous gap between those two pieces of evidence may be the most important unanswered question in the history of technology. What we have to confront is what that gap actually means. The Serapeum boxes still sit in their underground chamber at Saqqara. The crystal structure beneath every cut remains intact and undamaged. The traces of corundum still exist in the drill hole remnants at Aswan. Under magnification, the signs of point source thermal alteration can still be seen along the cut boundaries. And the KV-17 panel still remains on the wall of Seti I's lower corridor, carrying a description of a power source that appears nowhere else in the known ancient world. The permit to scan the surfaces of the Serapeum boxes is still pending. Meanwhile, the unfinished obelisk at Aswan, 1,000 tons of carefully cut granite abandoned in the middle of its construction, still lies where it was left. The cuts remain equally precise all the way to the point where the work suddenly stopped. There is no explanation for why it ended. The obelisk still rests in the bedrock, exactly where something appears to have set it down and never returned. Whatever powered the machine disappeared without leaving any clear trace of what it was. Only the cuts remain. They are still there in the stone. The diary of Mirror carefully recorded the movement of every limestone block transported to Giza. It says nothing about the granite. The KV-17 inscription refers to the power source only once, using a term from a vocabulary that left no other surviving trace and that no scholar has been able to translate with confidence. And for 2 decades, permission to make precise measurements of the Serapeum surfaces, the very measurements that could determine whether any residual signature of that power source remains in the stone, has repeatedly been denied. Not because a laser scan would damage the surfaces, but because of what such a scan might reveal. For 4,000 years, the stone has been presenting the same question. And according to this interpretation, someone has been making sure the answer remains buried. If you found this story fascinating, share this video with someone who loves ancient mysteries and unexplained history. And don't forget to subscribe, because there are many more forgotten discoveries and unanswered questions waiting to be explored. Sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't hidden because they're invisible. They're hidden because we've stopped looking.